Well, I will start, and maybe the Facebook folks will join in
Mhm.
um, at any moment. My name is Joe Cistone, and I'm the CEO of IPM, and I'd like to welcome you all to our Friday virtual forum at 11 a.m. Eastern Time. Those of you on Facebook, there's been a bit of a delay, so we hope you're able to join us and hear. And if you'd like to follow up on our dialogue or any of the comments and questions or concerns you have about what we talk about today, please feel free to reach out to Ilse Fender or myself directly. It's my pleasure today to take this time, sort of as we wind down, if you will, a really challenging and difficult 6 months that IPM and the world has been going through with the spread of the pandemic, and look forward to the end of the year, the Thanksgiving season for those of us here in the United States, the holiday season, the New Year, holidays coming up in India as well, the Jewish New Year, which has just begun, and Indigenous Peoples Day that we'll be celebrating, commemorating on Monday. And I'll be part of a wonderful forum at the University of Maine next week, in addition to a number of other things that I'll talk about a little bit later. But we thought this would be a good time to sort of take a pause in what for some of you may have felt like a constant stream of hopefully exciting and wonderful new information from our partners, our staff, and our friends around the world about all the important work that IPM has been doing under the rubric, if you will, of the hashtag IPM Responds. But really looking at what does COVID-19 and the novel coronavirus, as it's spreading even more rapidly again here in the United States, and certainly in India and Brazil and other places like that, and other parts of the world where we work, like El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Kenya, where people are trying to go back to work. To take a moment to really provide each of you as friends, board members, colleagues, donors, community partners, a chance to hear a little bit of an update from me, but really to dialogue and have conversation and ask questions about much of what you've heard since we began this program this spring, at least here in North America. We're hoping that going forward, we're going to take next week off because there are, I can't even tell you, I think there are 4 things that are very public that we're involved with next week. One is in conjunction with the Interreligious Task Force on Central America. They're having a year-long series of 40th anniversary programs. And on Monday, I'll be providing a welcome for a panel discussion that's being promoted. You've probably seen on our Facebook page by IPM in cooperation with the law school at Case Western Reserve University and the School of Social Work on the seeds of violence in El Salvador, planted primarily by the US government, US intervention over the 40-year period that IRTF, again, the Interreligious Task Force, has been active. And the 40-year period directly corresponds to the rape and murder of the 4 church women on December 2nd, 1980, which we're coming up on 40 years, hard to believe. Yesterday, Vicky, Aneda, Adela, and I had the pleasure of having another session in our virtual immersion experience program with the United Methodist Church from Virginia, Crossan UMC, whose pastor is likely to become a new member of the board. He's a Salvadoran immigrant in the United States, works as a pastor in Virginia, works with the youth group and their outreach initiatives, was with us in that large gathering of 20-some people we had through the Office of Church and Global Society for the United Methodists in El Salvador a year ago, which is hard to believe. And Julio followed up with a request for an immersion, which then turned into a virtual immersion. And so yesterday we had, I think it was the 4th course session of a 12 or 15-week session of virtual programming related to El Salvador. And yesterday, ironically, given this conversation, the focus was on the seeds of violence as well, and particularly the martyrs and the current situation with gangs in El Salvador, and also the way people are being sent back from the United States and what that's doing, including increasing the spread, because the people that are sent back on planes. You've probably seen this all together. Many of them are positive, and so they weren't positive when they get on the plane. When they land in El Salvador, they are. So we have that program with IRTF on Monday afternoon, and we'll be promoting this all on Facebook if you haven't seen it already. There's another program with the Cleveland Foundation and Global Cleveland related to racial equity training. Another one coming up a week after that. There's the program at the University of Maine in Orono, where Mahesh and I have both spoken at their program on, it's actually called Marxist Studies. They've never changed the title. It's a little funny to promote in the US with that title still, but the guy that runs it is the chair of their ethics and philosophy department. And I've spoken on sanctuary. Mahesh has spoken, I think, about Gandhi and other nonviolence. I've actually been in a number of them. And next Thursday, there's a program on Maine's 200-year history. So Maine will be a state for 200 years, but obviously there's a much lengthier history among the Wabanaki people, and some of you have been here know about my involvement with the Abbey Museum here, and so a fellow former board member of the Abbey is talking about the doctrine of discovery and the impact that continues to have on indigenous people in North America, but certainly throughout the world where we work. I heard this term, which I haven't heard. Rosalie Kell, our former colleague, talked to me about it quite a bit, because many of the sort of summer people that come to Maine, their money comes from mineral extraction. And I had never heard the term extractivism yet. I don't know if any of you have, but that's in the title, along with settler colonialism, which is sort of a more appropriate way to look at what happened in North America and Brazil, as opposed to some places where that was more about just bringing the minerals out and the wealth out, which is what is now referred to as extractivism. So there's that, and then a couple of other forums. I won't tell you all about each of them, but please keep your eye on Facebook. Really, each of these is an opportunity that's really exciting for IPM to reaffirm our commitment to working in partnership with community-based organizations, academic institutions, faith-based organizations, philanthropic groups in the places where we work in the world. But I thought I would take a few moments this morning to sort of update you, or maybe pull together a little bit all that you've been hearing over the past few months from many of my colleagues that are on the call. I do want to remind you, as we have our conversation today, that next week we again will not have a forum on Friday. The following Friday we'll be joined by Jacinta, who is the new director of Watoto wa Luanga, the children of Charles Luanga in the Kibera community or slum of Nairobi, Kenya. And I'd ask you as well to keep her in your prayers. She recently had surgery, and that's part of why I'm kind of batting for her today, and hopefully she'll be able to present on the 23rd. But she'll be talking to us about her important work in Kibera in Kenya. And then we're hoping that starting on, I guess, what will be, the Halloween weekend, whether that actually takes place or not is up for debate depending on where you live in the country or in the world. But we'll start to hopefully have more thematic focuses during these sessions. So we really want to take some opportunity with those of you who are sort of within the inner circle of IPM, if you will, to talk more about our work related to racial equity, gender equity, environmental justice, multi-faith relations, the treatment, and frankly, the violation of human rights increasingly around the world during this pandemic for women and girls. This month is National Domestic Violence Awareness Month. If you weren't aware of that, I posted something about that yesterday. And with the pandemic and many women in particular and kids being home and not being able to leave their homes, sort of trapped with abusers, both here in the US and around the world. And so we want to spend some time each of these sessions for the remainder of the year really digging in a little bit more deeply thematically to the priority areas of IPM's concern, and also reflect on what will be a significant election in the United States and what that might mean for our work, the ongoing crisis in India that we've referenced earlier, what's happening in Brazil. I was part of a dialogue last week with the Franciscan and Jesuit communities of Brazil. Leonardo Boff was the keynote presenter. Some of you know, kind of a longtime hero of mine, someone I wrote about my senior thesis at Holy Cross, and talked about, you know, the impact of COVID, particularly on the most marginalized people in Brazil. So to take an opportunity during these next couple of months to really dig in and plan for the next year. We also want to be thinking about the upcoming IPM board meeting. Initially, we were scheduled to gather in India after November 2nd, sort of parts of the week of the 2nd and the 9th. And we really want to nail down some times. So I would ask you, if you are a board member or if you're a member of our South Asian team, to be in touch with Ilsa and I about whether the week of the 2nd or the week of the 9th is better for you, because we want to schedule a couple of days of exchange with our South Asian partners in lieu of the regional conference that we had planned. Vicki and Mahesh and I are going to talk about sort of a virtual immersion component very briefly that might be part of that experience, but also the important board business we have to do as we look forward to the new year. There have been, as you know, since COVID really came to our attention and the pandemic really started to have a hugely significant impact in the places that we work around the world, the response of our regional offices and our project partners has simply been overwhelming. I don't know that I've ever been prouder of this organization, even in the midst of all the difficulties of the past few months, than I have been in my almost daily and certainly weekly conversations with my colleagues around the world and with our partners, in learning about the ways that people are trying against almost insurmountable odds to be present and to walk in solidarity and accompany the most vulnerable people in the world that we work with out of El Salvador, in Kenya, and India, and Nepal in particular. Just this past week, I had a dialogue with board member Xenia Chavez in Nicaragua, and we were just, you know, going back and forth in my feeble Spanish about how just what an unprecedented time this has been for everyone, and particularly for the women that she works with, but also, much like we were discussing earlier, the way the government in Nicaragua has used the pandemic as well to crack down against citizen movements there, and the way that the pandemic continues to impact the poorest of the poor. I heard a statistic last night as part of a racial equity working group that I'm a part of, we were really talking about mass incarceration. I'm sure many of you have read the book by Michelle Alexander, The New Jim Crow, and if you haven't, I'd highly recommend it. We actually showed virtually the film 13th, and if you haven't seen that, I would highly, highly recommend that. It's available online. Anna Duberay's brilliant film on the 13th Amendment and what that's meant for our history in the United States. But there was a panelist from the ACLU in Maine as part of the dialogue, and she said that one of the most interesting things they found nationally during the pandemic is that the rates of mass incarceration, which obviously heavily tilt out of proportion to population for African American and Hispanic peoples, Black and brown peoples, that there's almost a direct correlation in percentage between the rates of mass incarceration and the rates of death from COVID. So in fact, Maine has a little bit more percentage-wise of people that have died of COVID than some of its neighboring states, but really has done very well as a state overall, really better than any other state in New England other than Vermont. But the number of people the people that have died by percentage of COVID in Maine are still predominantly the poor and people of color, and vastly out of proportion for immigrants from places like Somalia, which there's a huge Somali community in Lewiston, Maine, at a similar percentage as that of incarceration. And I thought that was an incredibly telling statistic because it speaks to the real inequality that I think we all see growing in our nation, and the real moment of reckoning that we're having now around race and our history and immigration and issues related to equity and justice. So last week you had the opportunity to hear from Alyssa, who's not able to join us today, but has been doing remarkable work from her home in Atlanta, having completed her master's at Emory University. She continues as a part-time colleague of all of ours at IPM. We're hoping that she'll make her way back to Cleveland someday, but probably not soon. She's enjoying life in Atlanta, I think it's fair to say, even though their response to COVID hasn't exactly been wonderful statewide. And we heard about the research she's doing around monitoring, assessment, evaluation, and learning, and all the important things with the support of Anita and Bindia and others, the information that has been gathered as far as how our partners are responding. I won't, belabor you with that. You can go back and check that out if you'd like. But what we've seen, as I sort of referenced earlier, is people stepping up in almost unimaginable ways, putting themselves at risk, as Mahesh said earlier about HEMIT, putting their own health care in jeopardy or their own health status to be present and be supportive of our partners. And during the past 6 months, we've heard a lot from India and from Nepal, and particularly from El Salvador and other countries in Latin America, the Dominican Republic, Colombia, Nicaragua, et cetera. But that important work really continues, and it's the heart, the core, if you will, of why IPM was founded and what IPM is all about. And we want to encourage you to continue to support the work of our partners as best as you are able. I think it's important to point out that financially, I think many of you know, we kicked off the year with a match campaign with the idea that we had to replace, and I estimated it minimally 150,000 in immersion experience income that could likely grow to 300,000 if the pandemic wasn't adequately dealt with by the end of the current calendar year. The good news is with a recent $20,000 commitment from a new funding partner, a major foundation in New York City through a friend here in Maine, we were able to provide, oh, I'm sorry, there was a text message, I thought it was about this. We were able to almost reach the goal. We're at $149,125 of what was a $150,000 goal in gifts that were designated for this special COVID-19 matching gift appeal. There are 195 of the donor, excuse me, I want to make sure I get this right. 195 of, Ilsa, can you just help me with this one stat? The 195 of 475. I just want to make sure I say that correctly, what that reflects.
That is how many individuals responded to, we had mailed.
Oh, got it. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so 195 of the 475 VIP donors that we mailed to have responded. So, that's 41% as a response rate, but the dollar amount is at that $150,000, just short of it. And we remain deeply grateful to Hank Dahl, Diane Schrader, Peter and Rita Carfagna, the Grace Weber estate, and others for making that possible. That's sort of the good news. And there's additional good news that our general contributions to our annual fund are tracking ahead of where they were last year in both the number of donors and the dollar amount raised. 24 of those donors are new donors, and 57 are lapsed donors going back to a number of years. So that's really exciting. And of the current 2020 donors, their total cumulative giving history to IPM is more than $6 million, almost $6.4 million. So that's huge and wonderful news, but there is a downside. And the downside, or maybe a better way to put it rather than a downside, is sort of a question. We don't know, obviously, in these unprecedented times, how many of the people that gave to that campaign gave early because of the match and may not give at the end of the year because they feel like they've made their annual gift. We don't know, for example, how many of the people, we have one funder in particular who announced an early gift. We said that was great. And then we got later notice that said, well, you know, we're just giving you the money now because the market's doing well. And so that may not mean that we get their traditional gift in December. We also don't know, as many of you don't in your own lives, as I don't in mine, where people will be placed financially at the end of the year. If the pandemic continues to spread, if there's additional lockdowns, if small businesses continue to take a beating in this country, if foundations continue to designate their giving for pandemic response, or even in the case of, you know, our longstanding partner at the Cleveland Foundation, they're really, you know, wanting to reshape all their funding around a racial justice lens in response to the Black Lives Matter movement, and particularly the protests in Cleveland. And so, you know, there are going to be all kinds of new hurdles, obstacles related to foundation funding as funders try to pivot to responding to the real serious issues at play in our society or globe right now. But also, if the market were again to find itself in a difficult situation and or operating foundations like Singing for Change, they're very much restricted in what they're able to do. So the good news is while we've met the campaign match, we still have a huge gap in the amount of resources that we would have expected to receive through the Immersion Experience program. And just to give you a sense of that, as of October 7th, we've have $19,000 in Immersion Experience income for the year. This is on a cash basis, not on an accrued basis, as compared to last year at the end of the month, $126,000. So if my math is right, that's a $107,000 swing already. But perhaps more importantly is that this period coming from really from now and through February is when the bulk of our Immersion Experience income comes in, as people are doing those year-end donor trips, the winter break trips, and none of those are happening, obviously in person. Some of those are happening virtually, but at a significantly lower financial percentage. So while Vicki is doing remarkable work, and we're already doing our first virtual immersion with Crossin UMC from Virginia, and have upcoming immersions lined up with Seaside UCC, an open donor trip that some of you have talked about already with Vicki and myself, with Stonehill College, with Inspiring Minds, with Holy Cross, et cetera. You know, we don't have the $80,000 to $100,000 20-person trip to Kenya or India that would be typical at this time of the year. So good news is the match has been met and people have responded to COVID, and that's allowed us to really support our partners in extraordinary new ways and important ways, as you've heard from Adela and Aneta and Alyssa and Mahesh and India and others. Bad news, that 300,000 gap I'm talking about, you know, will be at by January or February. And so unless we raise another 150,000, that will continue to plague us through the coming year. And in all honesty, if we hadn't received the very significant CARES Act funding and also the CARES Act low interest sort of business stability loan, we would have had to take really drastic actions that to this date we haven't had to take. A couple of us have had to have, you know, pay postponed at times or reduced, but by and large, we haven't had to let anyone go. We were recently, just this month, able to bring Vicki and Aneta back up to 75% time, which was the initial projection at the beginning of the year, but we kept them at 50% time when the pandemic began, and they've been working incredibly hard and certainly merit a full-time position with IPM, and we hope to get there soon. But we're not out of the woods from a financial position. As I mentioned, the virtual immersion experience program is going really well, but part of the challenge is getting folks to commit and getting universities, seminaries, et cetera, to understand that this is an adequate replacement for what would have been an international experience. So without putting Clint or my alma mater, Eden, in the spotlight, you know, a really good example is they often have scholarship funding available for international travel. We were hoping that they would make that available for the virtual immersion, and we just found out that apparently they will not do that.
Well,
So
they claim that the fund is underwater, but I don't know why that's the case, because the stock market is back to where it's close to its maximum. So, but that's what they told me. So, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that, of course.
Yeah, and so that's, you know, that is kind of a typical thing that we are wrestling with, where the Holy Cross, for example, has a scholarship fund for international travel. Well, are they going to be able to get permission from their bursar's office to use those funds to allow students to have virtual immersions in Colombia and El Salvador like they would have done this past spring? So just imagine, you know, the Colombia trip for Holy Cross was probably a 70 to 80,000 immersion. The El Salvador one was probably a 50 or 60. Not only did we lose the one in May to El Salvador, but likely we'll lose the ones that would have taken place this coming year. Now, the good news is, you know, through Vicky's hard work and Adela and Alyssa and everyone else's support, we are able to offer a program that generates some income. But on a real dollar term, you know, there's a big difference between an $80,000 immersion and a 20,000 virtual immersion on all kinds of levels, and also the way that it keeps us distant. I just shared a Facebook post, a reminder of being in India, I don't know how many years ago, with Pavreen and some of the remarkable women from HUM. And, you know, I literally have no idea when I will be able to be in India again. I went for my weekly morning faith walk with a donor who was actually in India with Peter Mayer and I in 2016 during the election, and her spouse happened to come to Maine, and they didn't realize that I was 15 minutes from the campground they were in. And so we went for a walk, and, you know, we were talking about, you know, I've gone from being out of the country every month and around the country every month to really haven't been anywhere since February. And
Right.
my family might like that, but it makes it hard. You know, Zoom only goes so far in continuing to build relationships and respond to people. So I think, you know, at this point, looking at the time, I'll wind down and open it up for some questions. There are some important links. I don't know how many of you pay attention to the chat function when you're on these calls, but we are participating in the IRTF forum at 4:30 Eastern time. And actually Adela, our regional director for Latin America and the Caribbean, and our director of programs and partnerships, is going to be part of a panel with Christina Aid-Tos and Brenna Dilley. Christina is still a case law. Brenna has recently got married. I think many of you know she left IPM when the pandemic started to move to Georgia to be near her then fiance, now spouse. And they're going to talk about the paper that they wrote based on their experience in El Salvador last summer, meaning 2019, and as part of this IRTF event. And I'll be providing a brief introduction. And then we're also directly engaged through CASE with their Hispanic Heritage Month. And there's a panel on Friday at 6 p.m. that you could also check out. The UMO program that I mentioned, that I'm not part of the panelists, but I think that it would be, you know, wonderful if you're interested to learn more about the doctrine of discovery, which frankly, I didn't know much about until I went on the Abbey board and went on one of their retreats. That will be next Thursday at the University of Maine, and the Zoom link is on our Facebook page along with information to that. We are, and I want to be clear, next week, the Global Cleveland one, Ilsa?
Yes.
That you'll be attending. Can you
Next
just explain
Wednesday.
those? Do you mind explaining those two and the possibilities that might exist for others that are interested?
Sure. On Wednesday, October 14th, Global Cleveland here is coordinating a Goldwater racial equity
Not
training.
Goldwater,
Or
groundwater.
not Goldwater, sorry. Too many different forms, like you said. I'm getting my words all messed up.
Right.
But they are offering an opportunity for folks to go through that training. It's a 3-hour training at the cost of $90. There's also a panel discussion that the Cleveland Foundation is hosting on October 20th, primarily more focused on organizational board members on diversity and equity training. So that is, I can also, well, it probably would be better if anyone is interested in either of those two particular discussions and trainings to let me know, leave me a message in chat or send me an email, and I will help coordinate the registration, because it's a little bit different rather than just clicking on a link. Thanks, Joe.
Yeah, sure. And just so you know, we are, this is something some of you remember from our 40th anniversary gathering in Cleveland, and particularly the 44th, that Evelyn Burnett was part of a panel conversation with Randy McShepard, my spouse Aline, and others related to racial equity, Leah Gunning-Francis, the author of Ferguson and Faith. And we've been in conversation with Evelyn about our own board training around diversity, equity, and inclusion. Global Cleveland has this funding to do this, so we thought it would be an interesting way for us to partner, but we're also hopeful that we'll be able to offer that for anyone who's interested. And certainly if you are, to let Ilse or I know, because there's a myriad of opportunities right now, and it's something really that we need to be thinking more about. This is quite a diverse organization in every respect, probably the most diverse organization I've ever been affiliated with or been a part of, and we're really proud of the diversity, particularly in the younger staff stepping into leadership now at IPM. But there are issues related to racial equity and extractivism and indigenization, particularly here in the United States, that IPM has sort of been on the periphery of. So we'd like to continue to learn more and see where we can have the most positive impact possible. The last thing I would invite you to think a little bit about before I open this up is typically, what led to the first virtual forum was our inability to gather in St. Louis for our 46th anniversary at that recognition event we normally have in the late spring. And when we couldn't do that, we said, well, let's have a forum instead. And that kind of led to this. But here we are all those months later, and we would be planning One Night for One World, sort of our signature event in Cleveland for the autumn. And so we're looking at what might be possible virtually for that. So if you're interested in or have thoughts about what might be an exciting virtual event or something you might be willing to engage in and support us in, we'd love to hear from you directly in that regard. But I want to, again, thank you all for many of your faces. I've seen more in the last 6 months on Zoom and on Facebook than I have maybe in the last 10 years. So it's really wonderful to see Marty in the background there and so many others. And I'd just like to open it up now for any questions, comments, thoughts, things you'd like to share or hear a little bit more about in the time we have left together. Ilse, do you know if the Facebook feed is going? I still don't see it.
So
Yeah.
I've initiated it 4 times. It's just for some reason it's not going through.
It's not showing up on the.
No. So we can upload perhaps the Zoom link later on.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, because it's asking me to start the event, and it's like, well, why would I start it? I wonder if it.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, let's just continue. So anybody or do any of my colleagues have anything they'd like to add? Any updates from their more recent presentations? I see you all there and I don't want to put you on the spot. But Mahesh, did we cut you off earlier when you were talking about the current situation there? And we wanted
No, I think it's just that the fight, the corona is also an excuse to attack civil liberties in our country. So under the guise of Corona, a lot of the civil liberties are being curtailed, fundamental freedoms are being curtailed, and things like that. So that was a major concern. I already mentioned Father Stan and how he's being affected. It's not only Father Stanley. There's another lady, professor, also who's been jailed like that for almost 2 years now. And I know of at least 10 such activists. They're personally known to me too, who are been holed up in. You see, under this law, you can't do anything. You can't do anything. They don't need any evidence. They'll release you only if you are able to prove that you are not guilty. So that's a long process. So here the guilt is on you. The day they take you away, you're presumed guilty, and then you spend the next 2-3 years trying to prove that you're not guilty. So there's no way you can do it. Varavara Rao is another very famous poet from Andhra Pradesh. He's also across beyond 80. He had COVID. He has urinary tract infection. He has a lot of problems. He can't even hold his urine and control. So he's, even when they bring him to the court, he's all wet. Nobody seems to care a damn about it. We've been trying to do our best. They are blaming foreign governments for it. They're blaming the U.S. government for it. They're blaming U.S. non-profits for it, European non-profits for it. So there's no logic to it. They say anything and everything when they want to. I think the biggest recipient of foreign funds is the corporate sector in India. They get more money from the U.S. and from Europe than the non-profit sector. Religious groups are also getting a lot of money. Hindu religious groups in India get the maximum donations from non-resident Indians who live in the United States, Europe, and other parts of the world. So they are also a source of major funding. Their funds are never looked at, never inquired into. And it's not really funding. I think it's just a total clampdown in every which way possible. And they are trying to get through their agenda for greater corporate, what do you call it? They call it, there's a particular word. It's kind of crony capitalism is what they call it. Mm-hmm. So there are certain industrial families and firms which are getting all the deals. If you oppose them, they try to find some chink in your armor. So all those who are in opposition, maybe 6 months later, 1 year later, they're either bought off or they're threatened to support the government in power. And their model is only talk about development, don't talk about differences, don't talk about poverty, don't talk about caste, don't talk about communal violence, don't talk about gender equity, don't talk about women getting raped by upper caste men. They're trying to frame now the victim's family for the rape that took place on her, saying it is a family which killed her and murdered her and brutalized her. Media is also under a lot of attack. Most of the media houses, if they don't toe the line, there's a lot of economic offenses registered against them. And just fighting that itself is, battling that is a long drawn out battle. It's not that you're going to win or lose, but the idea is to tie you up in courts so that you can't do much on the ground. So anyway, in the midst of all this, I really am very grateful for the kind of work that Pochabai Foundation, Hema, his team, Bindya, Tara, Daksha, there are 3 or 4 other women also who are part of his team who are constantly working. There is Bhanubai, there are so many of them, I can go on endlessly. Navneet Bhai, then Hum is very active on the ground. I don't know if you saw the recent photographs of self-defense, karate training and all that they are taking. They have a very different approach. They are saying that violence is both domestic and societal. It's your family members, the men in your family also who sort of violate them in various ways, physically, emotionally, and it's also in society. So they're taking on a more militant stand in that sense. It's considered militant. To defend yourself is considered militant in this country. So, yeah, I think that's, yeah.
Mahesh,
Yes.
I wanted to ask, earlier you said that you are now required to have a bank account.
Yes.
How is that going to affect the work there? And are all of your funds there? Do you have any say about them? Are they investigated?
The bank account is with reference only to foreign money that comes in. And that's one of the reasons why we are not able to implement projects here the way we are able to do in other parts of the world. IPM is not able to register an office in India because it will be considered a foreign entity. And foreign donation means that you have to undergo a lot of scrutiny from the government. For the last 15 years, I personally, my organization, Hemant knows about it, has not been given permission by the Ministry of Home Affairs, by the Foreign Minister's Office. This is since 2004 or 5. They've been constantly denying me permission. Even permission in kind. I remember Central Michigan University wanted to send us water filters, and I was not allowed to permit it. I was not allowed to bring it into the country. So there is something known as the Foreign Contribution Regulation Act. So under this act, you need to take permission from the government. The government is most obviously not giving it to you. And those who manage to get it, they also have to undergo a lot of stringent procedures. We have to update, you have to send them daily ledgers, for example, of your accounts. That doesn't happen in any part of the world. Just imagine you have to send your account books on a daily basis, on a weekly basis. Then now what they're doing, they're making it more complicated in the sense that there are so many small organizations spread out all over the country, and they have to have a centralized bank account to receive these funds in Delhi, which is the capital city, as you all know. So how is somebody who's living 3,000 kilometers away or 4,000 miles away, who doesn't even have the means to travel this far, going to come there, register a bank account in which you can deposit even $100, for example. Even if I have to receive $100, I have to set up this account in Delhi. I have to take permission from the government for every money that is transferred in cash or in kind. So one of the ways that Joe and I Joe has been very sensitive to all this, and thankfully all of you have been, is that we set up this fellowship program. So what we do is we try to sustain the leadership, because without leaders, there's going to be no social change, there's going to be no organization build up. So that was the whole idea behind the fellowship program, that you sustain the core leadership. So that we are able to do. Fellowship is something that we are able to provide to each individual. So far, we have not come under the purview of the government. So that is the tool that we have used in IPM. And that's why you'll constantly hear about supporting our leadership. Projects and programs is something we try to bank on local resources. We ask people, but it's always very hard for the activists to ask money for themselves. That's one of the biggest thing. It's very hard for somebody who is constantly serving the poor to go and tell people, I need $500 a month or $200 a month just to sustain myself so that I can continue this work. I remember in my early days when I was much younger, just before I met Joe, I used to have 3 meals a week. That was all that I used to have. And the idea of having a fellowship program also emerged partly from my younger days when I struggled to get this basic support to help me sustain myself, to be able to do all the work that we can do. So that was the idea behind the fellowship program. And luckily, of all the agencies that I met and all the people that I met, Joe responded to it when I met him just after the tsunami. And Joe has been all over the world, so he understands how there are so many democracies which are hidden dictatorships, for example. And currently, it's a dictatorship. It's worse than the emergency that we had in 1977 in India. So in the guise of democracy, they're using all democratic methods. They're using the brute power of the majority to suppress the minority, the caste groups, dissent, every form of social change also. Even relief activity has become a political activity in this country. So COVID relief, whether it is flood relief, whom does it go to? Who gets it? How much does it go to? Who controls it? I mean, Joe and I have seen that during the tsunami. We have seen it post-earthquake, post the floods. So that's the difficulty of both process. There's structural issues and there are process issues. The whole idea is to burden you with so many procedural issues that in the end you just give up. You just give up. I hope I have answered your questions.
Yes, you have, Mahesh. Thank you. I'm just responding to Hemant. He's saying that he can't get Facebook. So I don't know what's wrong with the connection, but that it's hugely helpful to have, I think, that perspective. And Carol, Mahesh was probably more generous about my role. I mean, it's really the organization's role. And this goes back to Jim and Peter, as you know, particularly in India with the Mayor family. But we are facing, without getting too partisan in the US right now, we are seeing a rise in totalitarianism in many of the countries where we work. Aline's cousin was visiting from Kenya. She's a permanent resident in the US, but was here with us for a few days, a couple weeks ago. And we were talking about, what's happening there. We've heard now from Mahesh. I think you're all familiar with the situation in Nepal, which problematic would be a nice way of putting it, in Nicaragua with the Ortega regime. And Xenia has actually sent me a message as well. Sorry she's not able to follow us on Facebook, but looks forward to being able to join us soon. And yesterday, and I don't want to put them on the spot, but Vicky, Adela, Aneta, and I spoke with the group from Virginia about the current political climate in El Salvador and how much Bukele, the current leader, who was in theory brought to power in alliance with more progressive movements in the country, has really shifted to sort of being the sort of the nice face of really hardline elements there, and how much the situation in El Salvador now reflects in many ways what the situation in the country was like in the 50s and 60s, where there's a lot of tension, a lot of repression of popular movements, a lot of crackdown under the guise of response to the pandemic. And so in Brazil, that forum I was a part of last week, that's all they really talked about is the Bolsonaro regime and what's happening there. And we heard from Marta and Lucidari about Colombia. So there's really no place, people that are in power for the wrong reasons will use any excuse they can to advance their own interests. I don't think that's a surprise to any of us, no matter what our faith and our hope for humanity might be. But in a situation like this, when the world's attention is focused sort of more inwardly, it's quite easy, if you will, for the kind of leaders that are unfortunately in power in the countries where we work to really strike out at their own citizens in really repressive ways. The situation in India continues to be difficult for us. And that's one of the reasons we've expanded our board presence from India to help navigate some of these issues, but also to have particularly through Banju Dipti, who's joined the board, to have a more strategic organizational partner in country, in addition to the Notre Dame sisters, who many of you know. Marie Manning normally joins us on Facebook. They're headquartered in Cleveland and have a rich and long history in India. And Sister Priscilla, who's a former board member, is a member of that community. What else? Would anyone else like to add anything? Anything from any of our, looks like we have 3 of our Salvadoran colleagues on the phone, or any thoughts about the situation we're in right now and what Mahesh was referring to in relation to your own government, without putting you on the spot too much?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joe, sure. I think I mentioned this earlier in the week, and both Adela and Aneta know I do a reference to this almost every single day. I was telling Joe about a couple of days ago how I never imagined I was going to be living inside of the book of 1984 from Orwell. I honestly, I read it a couple years ago, I think, and I mean, it's such an important book, and of course, that's not read in high school in El Salvador, not in college. I mean, you just won't get to read that, and I can't help but think, but no, I would say it's of course on purpose. Right now, I would say our government, it's just taking advantage of us as a country, not knowing so many things and not being aware of our history. So many people are right now saying that this government is doing so many great stuff, which they are not. People are being tricked. And well, just so you know, I'm saying specifically the 1984 thing. This president that we have right now, back in the day when he was building up his career, he would give so many compliments to all of this media that would criticize the government from Arena or from FMLN. So people started to believe he was also such a different politician, that he was actually not a politician, and that's why they trusted him. But what's happening right now is that all of the same media is now criticizing the work he's doing. So right now it's not a praise that they are getting, it's actually hate. And it's a hate campaign, the one that it's going on right now. If you think different from the government, you are a target. If you think different from the government, you are part of the same people that are in the power as usual, which most of us are definitely not. Most of us just can't see what is going on. And actually, he has developed his own TV show, his TV media thing, so he can keep on manipulating information, so that the population doesn't have to go to any other source um, to get information. They will just believe him. And actually, the one thing that he's also been doing is just running the country by Twitter. So any single thing that, and I know you're laughing because I know that what that look like, that would look similar to also the U.S. reality. I'm sorry if it's inappropriate to say, but it's actually it's sad. I mean, during COVID, right now we're looking at so many money that was stolen, and that has not been reported anywhere. Even Anita and I, when we were in quarantine, we should have been there for 15 days here in El Salvador when we got back. And we just stayed for a week. And as we understood, there was some kind of manipulation in those reports as well. I'm not saying directly us, but many others. And you will see that none of that is happening in Twitter. People don't know which are the official sources or where to go. So yeah, I think that's what's going on. We have become the same reality that's going on in 1984's Orwell version. I would say that's the best way to describe it. It's really sad.
Yeah. Does anybody have any particular questions they'd like to share? You can probably see me looking down. I'm going back and forth with a number of people who are frustrated about the inability to join via Facebook. So we will share the Zoom recording on if anyone makes a personal request, and we've already received a few of those from, as I mentioned, Hemit, Xenia, and Marie Manning. Anyone else have a question or comment on anything you've heard today? Anything I shared?
Yeah, it's so interesting. Just the last, from Mahesh and Vicky, there's so much we can learn from each other, because both of those comments illustrate the authoritarians all play out of the same playbook, not by design, but they just use the same tools. And like Mahesh said, the relief activity becomes political activity, and that's exactly what we saw here as well. Hopefully not always successfully, but that was Trump's first instinct. Don't tell his people, don't answer the phone when that horrible Governor Whitmer calls, because she doesn't like me and I don't like her. And it's if you criticize, you're the enemy. And it's the same playbook, and hopefully that's becoming even more obvious to people, and should help us in the resistance. But we need to keep learning from each other.
Yeah. Thank you, Jim, for sharing that. And, I'm struck. I can't remember where I heard this a few weeks ago, but I've been repeating it pretty much in every conversation I've been having with people that, as people of faith, as people committed to justice and change, we need to continue to speak truth to power, even when those in power have no interest in the truth or hearing the truth. And I just, I think that's where we're at, no matter if we're sitting in Cleveland or Columbia. And these are difficult times, but one of the real things that's kept me going without you know, being overly melodramatic or emotional, is the sense of solidarity and fellowship, if you will, that I know that I and my colleagues have felt from all of you. Your support during these really unprecedented times, and also the way we've been able to support one another, and in really the remarkable way our partners and our staff have stepped forward to respond in just strikingly terrible, horrific, difficult, unprecedented times. So we're at 12 o'clock. I want to remind you again that we will not have a forum next week, but we have in the chat function. If you really want to hear from me or Adela or anyone else next week, there will be other opportunities to do that in partnership with the Interreligious Task Force on Central America, the Case Law School, the School of Social Work and Applied Social Sciences at Case, where our former board chair Sharon Milligan is still the associate dean. At the Social Justice Institute at Case Western, which has become a really strong collaborative and community partner of ours, and through these programming with Global Cleveland, the Council on World Affairs, the Cleveland Foundation, the University of Maine, etc. So Carol, do you have a question, or I see a hand up?
Yeah, just in listening to everything today and over the past couple of weeks, IPM stands out in a myriad of ways for its presence, for its staffing. It has been remarkable, the caliber of people, no matter where they are, what they are doing, and working with systems that don't work necessarily for what IPM wants to do, but they're finding new ways. I'm hearing Mahesh, I'm hearing Vicki say that we're able to do the things that IPM stands for. And I just want to give my thumbs up, and I am just overwhelmed by the presence of IPM wherever it is.
Thank you, Carol. And I also want to acknowledge, many of you know, probably my best friend in Italy is actually a Welshman who's on our advisory council. Many of you know, an honorary director, Tony Dahl, and his organization, the World Food Program, received the Nobel Peace Prize overnight. So congratulations to Tony and everyone affiliated with WFP.
Yeah.
We will be.
Did you see Hemet is there, Joe? Did you see?
I did see Hemet. We've been going back and forth. Hi, Hemet.
Oh, okay.
And you can probably see Kemi hiding in the background as well. But I want to wish you all a good day. Hemet, be well and be safe. And we're going to, some of the staff members and the leadership team are going to stay on the call a bit. We need to touch base on something, but I'd welcome the rest of you to disengage as you'd like. And we'll see you on the 23rd at our next forum, if not before then. And may the peace that passes all understanding remain with you in these difficult times.
Love to all.
Peace.
Thank you.
Take care.